Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Lieutenant Tina had been in worse situations than this. Not many, mind you, but a few. That firefight on Kepler Station where she'd run out of ammunition and had to improvise with a fire extinguisher came to mind. Or that time her drop pod had malfunctioned, and she'd free-fallen for an extra 30 seconds while her squad watched and probably placed bets on whether she'd survive. But being zip-tied to a metal chair in a Ralmeth detention facility while 4 insectoid aliens clicked and chittered at each other in a language that sounded like someone tap-dancing on broken glass? That was climbing the charts pretty quickly. "You know," Tina said, rolling her shoulders as much as her restraints allowed, "I'm getting the distinct impression you folks didn't actually plan for human prisoners. This chair wasn't built for someone with a spine, was it?" The nearest Ralmeth guard, its compound eyes glittering in the harsh overhead lights, tilted its triangular head at her. The translator unit on its chest plate crackled to life. "Silence, human. Your comfort is not our concern." "Oh, I can tell," Tina replied, shifting her weight. The chair had clearly been designed for the Ralmeth's segmented body structure, which meant it had about 6 too many grooves and not nearly enough actual seat. Interior design really isn't your strong suit, is it? Very utilitarian, cold. I'd suggest some throw pillows, maybe a nice plant in the corner, but I'm guessing your species eats plants. The guard's mandibles clicked together in what Tina had learned was either annoyance or hunger. Maybe both. Hard to tell with giant space bugs. The interrogation had been going on for what felt like hours, though Tina's internal clock was shot to pieces after the ambush on Meridian 9. 1 minute she'd been running reconnaissance with her squad. The next she'd been separated, cornered, and staring down the business end of about 15 plasma rifles. The Ralmeth Collective didn't take prisoners often, which meant she was either incredibly valuable or incredibly unlucky. Probably both, knowing her track record. "We will ask again," another guard said, this one taller and with more elaborate markings on its exoskeleton. Some kind of officer, probably. "What was your unit's objective on this moon?" "Tourism," Tina said flatly. "I heard the weather this time of year is lovely. Very rocky. Lots of craters. Really wanted to get some photos for the scrapbook." The officer's antennae twitched. "Your sarcasm will not protect you." "No, but it makes me feel better, so I'm going to keep doing it." The truth was, Tina didn't have much to tell them, even if she'd wanted to. Her mission had been basic reconnaissance, checking radiation signatures near the disputed mining colonies. Nothing classified, nothing earth-shattering. Just standard military grunt work that had gone sideways when the Ralmeth had decided to patrol the same sector at the same time. The galaxy's worst timing, courtesy of Murphy's Law. The officer leaned closer, and Tina got a good look at its face, which was exactly as pleasant as staring into the eyes of a praying mantis the size of a refrigerator. "We know your species has been developing new stealth technology. You will tell us about it." "New stealth technology?" Tina raised an eyebrow. "Buddy, I'm a ground pounder. They don't tell me about fancy tech. They just point me at things and say, 'Go stand there and try not to die.' I'm basically a very expensive meat puppet." The guards exchanged clicks and whistles. The translator couldn't quite capture the nuance, but Tina was pretty sure they were debating whether she was genuinely this useless or just playing dumb. Jokes on them. She was fantastic at being both. After another round of questions that went absolutely nowhere, the officer made a sharp gesture with one of its 4 arms. "Take her to Detention Block 9. We will resume interrogation after rest cycle." "Oh, good," Tina said, as two guards hauled her to her feet. "I was hoping for a tour of the facility. Does Detention Block 9 have a better view than this place? Maybe a minibar?" The guards dragged her through a series of corridors that all looked identical. Gray metal walls, harsh lighting, and that weird humming sound that all alien ships and bases seem to have. She'd never figured out if it was engines or life support, or just the architectural equivalent of tinnitus. Detention Block 9 turned out to be less of a block and more of a hastily converted storage area. The cells were basic force field cages, most of them empty, except for some supply crates and what looked like maintenance equipment. Budget cuts in the Ralmeth military, apparently. "Here," one of the guards said, shoving her toward a cell in the corner. Tina stumbled inside, and the force field hummed to life behind her. The cell was maybe 3 meters by 3 meters, with a bench that looked about as comfortable as sleeping on a bag of rocks, and absolutely nothing else. No window, no amenities, not even a questionable toilet situation. "5 stars," she announced to no one in particular. "Would definitely stay here again. Great ambiance. Love what you've done with the complete lack of anything." The guards clicked something that might have been laughter or might have been them discussing what to have for dinner. Then they left, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. Tina sat down on the bench and immediately regretted it. Yep, rocks. Definitely rocks. She was trying to find a position that didn't make her spine want to file a formal complaint when she heard it. A sound from the adjacent cell that made her freeze. It was a low, rumbling growl, followed by a hiss, and what sounded like something large scraping against metal. Slowly, carefully, Tina turned her head. The cell next to hers wasn't empty. Through the shimmering barrier of her force field and the one separating the cells, she could just make out movement. Large shapes, low to the ground, pacing back and forth with an agitated energy that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," she muttered. As her eyes adjusted to the dim lighting in the adjacent cell, she could make out more details. 3 creatures, each about the size of a large wolf, with sleek bodies covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light. Their heads were elongated and reptilian, with rows of teeth that would make a shark jealous. 6 legs each, ending in claws that left scratches on the metal floor as they moved. Ralmeth predator cubs. Tina had seen the adult versions during combat. They were the Ralmeth's elite shock troops, bred and trained for close-quarters carnage. Fast, vicious, and absolutely relentless. The collective used them the way humans used tanks. Point them at the enemy, and let them do what they do best. And here she was, separated from 3 of their babies by what was probably just a few meters, and some energy barriers that may or may not hold if they decided to test them. "Fantastic," Tina said quietly. "Just fantastic. Hey, universe, I'd like to file a complaint about today. All of it. The whole thing." One of the cubs, the largest of the 3, stopped pacing and turned to look directly at her. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, a bioluminescent yellow-green that tracked her movement as she shifted on the bench. Tina held very still. She'd grown up on a colony farming world where the livestock could and would kill you if you spooked them wrong. Rule number 1. Don't make sudden movements around large predators. Rule number 2. Maintain eye contact but don't stare them down. Rule number 3. Pray. The cub tilted its head, studying her with an intelligence that was deeply unsettling. "Hey there," Tina said softly, keeping her voice level. "Nice. Teeth? Very impressive. Really sharp-looking. I'm sure you're very proud of them." The cub made a sound that was half chirp, half growl. One of the other cubs, slightly smaller and with lighter coloring on its scales, moved closer to the barrier between them. It sniffed at the force field, and the energy crackled slightly. The third cub, the smallest but with the most elaborate scale patterns, hung back but watched intently. "Yeah, okay," Tina said, more to herself than to them. "So this is how I die. Eaten by alien space lizard babies while tied up in the galaxy's worst hotel. At least it'll make for an interesting report. 'Cause of death. Poor real estate choices." The largest cub made that chirp growl sound again, and this time the other two echoed it. The sound had a plaintive quality to it. Almost lonely? Tina frowned. Now that she was looking at them more carefully, the cubs didn't seem aggressive. Agitated, yes. Restless, definitely. But not hostile. They kept pacing, circling each other, occasionally making those strange vocalizations that sounded less like threats and more like distress calls. Her farming instincts kicked in despite herself. She'd spent enough time around stressed animals to recognize the signs. These cubs weren't angry. They were anxious. "Rough day for you too, huh?" she said quietly. The largest cub stopped pacing again and looked at her. Really looked at her, with an intensity that suggested it understood tone if not words. Tina sighed and leaned back against the wall, trying to find a position on the terrible bench that wouldn't give her permanent spinal damage. "Yeah, I get it. This place is the worst. Terrible lighting, no privacy, and I'm betting the food situation isn't great either." The cubs settled down slightly, though they kept moving in restless circles. Tina watched them, her mind working through the situation. Detention Block 9 was clearly an overflow area, which meant the base was probably at capacity. The Ralmeth had dumped her here because they didn't have anywhere else to put a human prisoner, and the cubs were here because... Actually, why were the cubs here? This was a military command post, not a breeding facility. Unless the facility served double duty, which would explain the weird layout and the improvised holding cells. "Let me guess," Tina said, still keeping her voice soft and even. "Your handlers don't know what to do with you. You're probably from some important bloodline, future elite warriors or whatever, but you're not cooperating with their training protocols, so they stuck you in timeout while they figure out their next move." The middle-sized cub with the lighter scales pressed closer to the barrier, those glowing eyes fixed on her. It made a sound that was almost a whine. "Yeah, that tracks," Tina continued, feeling slightly insane for having a one-sided conversation with alien predators, but too tired to care. "Thing is, you can't train babies like they're adults. Doesn't matter what species you are. Push too hard, too fast, and they just shut down, or lash out. Bet you've been doing both." The smallest cub finally moved closer to the others, and Tina noticed it was limping slightly on one of its hind legs. Not injured, exactly, but definitely favoring that side. Her farming instincts went into overdrive. That was a stress response, not a physical injury. The cub was unconsciously protecting itself from perceived threats. "They've been scaring you," Tina said quietly, and it wasn't a question. "Probably think they're toughening you up, making you strong. But you're just kids. You need—" She trailed off, shaking her head. What did alien predator babies need? She had no idea. But she knew what scared, stressed animals needed, regardless of species: calm, consistency, and someone who wasn't trying to turn them into weapons before they'd even figured out how to be themselves. The cubs had gone quiet, all three of them watching her now. The energy in the adjacent cell had shifted from agitated to something else. Curious, maybe, or just exhausted enough to take a break from panicking. Tina settled back against the wall and closed her eyes. Well, this is my life now. Imprisoned by space bugs, sharing a wall with baby space dragons, and talking to myself like I've lost my mind, which I probably have. Tomorrow can't possibly be worse than today. The universe, as always, was listening, and it had opinions about statements like that. But for now, in the dim light of Detention Block 9, there was just silence, broken only by the soft sounds of 3 predator cubs finally starting to settle down. Tina woke up to the sound of metal tearing. Not bending, not straining, actually tearing, like someone was ripping through a steel bulkhead with their bare hands, except the someone in question had claws and apparently zero respect for structural integrity. She sat up fast, her back screaming in protest from the terrible bench, and immediately understood that her day was about to get significantly more complicated. The barrier between her cell and the cub's enclosure wasn't there anymore. Well, it was there, technically, but only in the sense that scattered pieces of metal framework were now decorating both cells like the world's worst confetti. The force fields had apparently been anchored to that framework, which meant they'd gone down when the cubs had decided to do some impromptu remodeling. And all 3 cubs were now in her cell. "Okay," Tina said, keeping her voice extremely calm, despite the fact that her heart was trying to break the sound barrier. "Okay, this is fine. This is totally fine. Just some apex predators in my personal space. No big deal." The largest cub, the one she'd mentally nicknamed Pitch because of its dark scales, stood about 2 meters away, head lowered, watching her with those unsettling yellow-green eyes. Its siblings flanked it on either side, the lighter-scaled one, Null, and the smallest with the elaborate patterns, Wraith. She was trapped on a bench with her back against the wall, and 3 predators between her and any possible exit. Not that there was an exit, since the force field on her cell was still active. Through the doorway to the corridor, she could hear alarmed clicking and the sound of running feet. The guards had noticed. Of course they had. Probably every sensor in the facility had lit up like a festival when the cubs broke through. "Listen," Tina said, addressing the cubs because talking was better than panicking. "I know you're probably hungry, and I probably look like a convenient snack, but I'm actually mostly bone and spite. Very gamey. Terrible nutritional value. I'd give me like 2 stars out of 5, honestly." Pitch took a step closer. Tina's farming instincts warred with her survival instincts. Running would trigger a chase response. Screaming would startle them. Fighting was laughable. That left exactly one option: stay calm and see what happened. The cub came closer, close enough that Tina could smell it. A sharp, clean scent, like ozone and sun-heated stone. It stretched its neck out, sniffing at her with obvious curiosity. "Yeah, hi," Tina said quietly. "I'm Tina. I'm terrified. Nice to meet you." Pitch's nostrils flared, processing whatever information human scent conveyed. Then, moving with surprising gentleness for something with that many teeth, it bumped its head against her knee. Tina froze. That was not an attack. That was the universal animal gesture for "pay attention to me." Her hand moved before her brain could authorize it, reaching out slowly to touch the scales on the cub's head. They were warm, surprisingly smooth, with a texture somewhere between snake scales and polished stone. Pitch leaned into the touch and started making a sound that could only be described as purring. It wasn't like a cat's purr. It was deeper, more resonant, with a slight clicking undertone that Tina felt in her chest as much as heard. But it was definitely, unmistakably, contentedly vibrating. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Tina whispered. Null apparently decided this looked interesting and moved closer, nudging Pitch aside to get access to the mysterious human. Tina, operating purely on instinct now, shifted her other hand to scratch behind what might have been ears or might have been sensory organs. The result was the same. More purring. Wraith, not wanting to be left out, clambered onto the bench beside her, favoring that hind leg, and pressed against her side. Within 30 seconds, Tina found herself buried under approximately 200 kilos of predator cubs, all of them making that deep, thrumming purr that turned her entire skeleton into a tuning fork. "This is insane," she said to no one in particular. "This is absolutely insane. I'm being cuddled to death by space dragons." Through the force field of her cell, she could see guards gathering in the corridor, at least 8 of them, all clicking frantically at each other. Their weapons were drawn but not aimed, probably because shooting into a pile of predator cubs and a human prisoner was a great way to cause a diplomatic incident and a whole lot of paperwork. One of the guards was speaking rapidly into a communication device, its antennae vibrating with what Tina had learned to recognize as stress. Good. Let them be stressed. She was trapped under a pile of babies who could probably bite through her femur like it was a breadstick. Except they weren't biting, they were purring. And the more Tina petted them, scratching along their scales and murmuring nonsense in that tone she'd used on anxious livestock back home, the more they settled. Pitch had its massive head in her lap. Null was pressed against her right side, one clawed foot resting on her leg in a way that would be alarming if it wasn't also oddly endearing. Wraith had managed to squeeze behind her on the bench, using her back as a support. And they were all, every single one of them, purring like the galaxy's most dangerous percussion section. "You're just babies," Tina said softly, the realization hitting her fully. "They've been treating you like soldiers, but you're just scared kids who don't understand what's happening to you." Pitch made a small chirping sound and nuzzled closer. Tina thought about her childhood on the farming colony. They'd raised loraxen, massive 6-legged herbivores with horns that could gore a transport vehicle. Dangerous animals, potentially deadly, but they were also herd creatures who needed socialization and gentle handling. Push them too hard, separate them too young, treat them like products instead of living things, and they became unstable. The Ralmeth were warrior culture. Everything she'd learned about them suggested they saw strength as the ultimate virtue and weakness as something to be eliminated. They probably took these cubs from whatever passed for parents in their species and immediately started combat conditioning. No wonder the cubs were a mess. "They don't know what to do with you," Tina continued, still petting Pitch's scales in long, soothing strokes. "You're not responding to their training. You're probably aggressive with handlers. You're stressed out of your minds. So they stuck you in a cell and hoped you'd just— what? Figure it out on your own?" More guards arrived in the corridor. Tina counted at least 15 now, including some with heavier armor and what looked like stun weapons. A response team, probably. One of the guards, bolder or more desperate than the others, approached the force field. Its translator crackled. "Step away from the cubs, human." "Can't," Tina said cheerfully, even though her heart was still hammering. "I'm pinned. Also, I'm pretty sure if I move suddenly, they'll panic. And then you'll have 3 terrified predators doing that thing where prey animals stampede. Except these aren't prey animals. So, maybe don't make me move suddenly." The guard's mandibles clicked in agitation. "They will kill you." "They're cuddling me," Tina pointed out. "Look, I know this is weird, but they're calm right now. That's better than whatever was happening before, right?" Another guard spoke up, this one with more elaborate markings. The cubs have been difficult. Handlers cannot approach them safely. Yeah, I'm getting that impression. Tina adjusted her position slightly, and Wraith immediately shifted to maintain contact. When's the last time they ate? Silence from the guards, then some clicking discussion. Finally, feeding time is in 3 cycles. That's not what I asked. When did they last actually eat? More clicking. The marked guard said, "They refuse food from handlers." Of course they did. Stressed animals often stopped eating, and if the handlers were using food as a training tool, punishment and reward, the cubs had probably learned to associate meals with more trauma. They need routine, Tina said, surprising herself with how confident she sounded. Calm presence, consistent care, and for everyone to stop treating them like they're supposed to be, killing machines when they haven't even figured out how to be kids yet. You lecture us on the care of our own species? The marked guard's tone was sharp. I'm a farm girl from a colony world, Tina replied. I've raised animals that could kill me in about 6 different ways. The principle's the same. Babies need to feel safe. Doesn't matter if they're human babies, Loraxan calves, or elite warrior cubs. You can't train what you haven't nurtured. Pitch yawned, displaying a truly impressive array of teeth, then settled deeper into her lap. The purring hadn't stopped. Look, Tina said, meeting the guard's compound eyes as best she could through the force field. I don't know what your protocols are, and honestly, I don't care. But these cubs are calm right now for the first time in probably weeks. You want to separate us and start another crisis? Or do you want to take a minute and think about why a human prisoner is better at handling your elite warriors than you are? That was probably pushing it, but Tina was exhausted, covered in predator cubs, and operating on exactly 0 patience for bureaucratic nonsense. The guards clicked and chittered at each other in rapid-fire conversation. The marked one spoke into its communication device again, longer this time. Then they all just stood there, watching, waiting. Tina leaned her head back against the wall and kept petting the cubs, her fingers finding the spots that made them purr louder. Null had fallen asleep, its breathing deep and even. Wraith was close behind. This is my life now, Tina muttered. Professional predator babysitter. That's definitely going in my service record. Pitch made a small, contented sound and closed its eyes. Morning shift arrived to absolute chaos. Tina knew this because the clicking reached a pitch and frequency that suggested multiple Ralmeth were having simultaneous breakdowns in the corridor. She'd managed maybe 3 hours of sleep, which was approximately 3 hours more than she'd expected given the whole covered in predator cubs situation, but it wasn't nearly enough to deal with the disaster unfolding outside her cell. Report! Someone barked in Ralmeth, the translator picking it up a second later. What is the meaning of this? Sir, the cubs breached containment during night cycle, one of the guards from yesterday explained, its voice crackling with stress. They are now in the human prisoner's cell and refuse to leave. Refuse? They are animals, not committee members. Remove them. We tried, sir. They become aggressive when handlers approach. There was a pause, then, show me. Tina opened one eye. Through the force field, she could see a new Ralmeth arriving, this one significantly larger than the others, and wearing armor with golden accents that screamed high-ranking officer. Its carapace had intricate patterns that suggested age and experience, and every other guard in the corridor immediately straightened to attention. General. Morvex, her brain supplied. Had to be. You didn't get that kind of reaction from anything less than top brass. The general strode forward and stopped dead, when it saw into her cell. Tina, for her part, was still buried under cubs. Pitch had claimed her entire lap and most of her torso. Null was draped across her legs. Wraith had somehow wedged itself between her and the wall, using her shoulder as a pillow. All three were fast asleep and purring like industrial machinery. "Explain," the general said, its voice dangerously quiet. "They, the guard started, mandibles clicking nervously. "The human appears to have, that is, the cubs seem to have bonded with—" "I can see what they have done," Morvex interrupted. "I want to know why we have not corrected this situation." Another guard spoke up. "Junior Handler Pelnich attempted to enter the cell 1 hour ago. The cubs woke and became hostile. The largest one, Designation Pitch, nearly severed his arm." "Only because your handler came in swinging a shock stick," Tina said, without opening her eyes fully. "Maybe try not leading with aggression when dealing with already traumatized babies." Every compound eye in the corridor swiveled to her. "The human speaks," Morvex said, moving closer to the force field. "Tell me, prisoner, what mind control technique are you employing?" Tina did open both eyes now, looking at the general with an expression of pure disbelief. "Mind control? Are you serious right now? I'm using an ancient and mystical technique called not being a complete nightmare to be around. You should try it sometime." The general's antennae twitched. A sign Tina had learned meant extreme annoyance. "You will show respect, human. I'm literally a prisoner covered in your elite warrior cubs who apparently like me better than their own species," Tina replied. "I think we're past the point of formal military protocol, don't you?" Morvex moved closer, studying the scene with those multifaceted eyes that saw in spectrums Tina couldn't even comprehend. Pitch stirred slightly, cracked one eye open to look at the general, made a sound that was definitely a hiss, and then burrowed back against Tina's chest. One of the guards made a noise that might have been a strangled laugh. Morvex's head snapped toward the offender, a smaller Ralmeth with silver markings on its thorax. "You find this amusing, Greneth?" Officer Greneth, clearly the second in command and equally clearly regretting his life choices, straightened. "No, sir. Merely, the cubs have never shown such clear preference before. It is noteworthy." "Noteworthy," the general repeated flatly. "These are the offspring of 3 different high command bloodlines. Their genetic value alone exceeds the worth of 6 warships, and they are currently treating an enemy combatant as their brood keeper." "To be fair," Tina interjected, "I'm not doing much. They're the ones who broke into my cell. I'm just sitting here trying not to get eaten." "Yet they are calm," Greneth observed. "The cubs have been unstable since arrival, refusing food, attacking handlers, destroying equipment. The broodmasters were considering termination protocols. That got Tina's full attention. "Wait, you were going to kill them?" "They are failures," Morvex said coldly. "Warriors who cannot be controlled are liabilities." "They're children." Tina's voice rose despite herself, and all 3 cubs stirred. She immediately softened her tone, running soothing hands over their scales. "They're babies who are scared and stressed, and being pushed into training they're not ready for. Of course, they're lashing out." "You claim to understand our species better than we do?" The general's tone could have flash-frozen hydrogen. "I claim to understand basic animal behavior," Tina shot back. "I grew up raising livestock that could and would kill handlers if you spooked them wrong. You learn real quick that force isn't the only form of strength. Sometimes you need patience, gentleness, the ability to read what an animal needs instead of what you want them to be." She gestured at the cubs with her chin, since her hands were occupied with petting duty. "These 3 are stressed out of their minds, They're not eating because they don't feel safe. They're aggressive because everyone they meet treats them like weapons instead of living creatures. And they latched onto me because I'm the first being in probably weeks who hasn't hurt them or tried to force them into submission. The corridor went silent, except for the purring. Morvex stared at her for a long moment, then at the cubs, then back at her. Demonstrate. Demonstrate what? This technique. Show us how you maintain control. Tina almost laughed. I'm not controlling them. I'm just being calm. Watch. She shifted slightly, adjusting her position. Null immediately woke up, head raising in alert. Hey there, sweetheart. It's okay. Just getting more comfortable. She scratched behind Null's head, in that spot she'd found last night that made the cub's hind leg twitch. Null's eyes half closed in pleasure, and the purring intensified. You see that? Tina said quietly. I'm not forcing anything. I'm responding to what she needs. Comfort. Security. Someone who isn't trying to turn her into a soldier before she's even figured out how to be herself. Impossible, one of the other guards muttered. Cubs do not respond to such weakness. It's not weakness, you absolute walnut, Tina said. It's called emotional intelligence. These cubs have been in survival mode since birth. Constantly on edge, constantly waiting for the next threat. They can't learn anything when they're that stressed. But give them safety, routine, calm presence, then they can actually develop properly. Morvex was quiet for a long moment. Then, these bloodlines represent generations of selective breeding. They are meant to be the finest warriors the collective has produced. You suggest we have been raising them incorrectly. I'm saying you've been raising them like machines instead of living things, Tina replied. And it's not working, or I wouldn't be having this conversation while covered in 3 predators who are currently using me as a very uncomfortable mattress. Wraith chose that moment to wake up, yawn widely enough to display every single tooth, stretch in a way that dug claws uncomfortably close to Tina's kidneys, and then settle back down with a contented sigh. Greneth made that sound again, the one that might have been a laugh. This time, Morvex didn't reprimand him. You will remain here, the general said finally, with the cubs, until we determine the appropriate course of action. What, as their handler? Tina asked. As whatever prevents them from destroying half the facility, Morvex replied. Officer Greneth, assign guards to monitor. No one enters that cell without my direct authorization. And contact the broodmasters. Tell them we may have found a solution to our problem. He turned to leave, then paused. Human, if those cubs are harmed while in your care, you will not enjoy the consequences. Right back at you, Tina said, meeting his gaze steadily. These babies are under my protection now. Anyone comes at them with shock sticks or termination protocols, we're going to have a much bigger problem than some property damage. The general's antennae twitched again, but he said nothing. He simply turned and left, the other guards parting to let him through. Greneth lingered a moment longer. For what it is worth, human, I hope you succeed. The cubs deserve better than termination. Then he too was gone, leaving Tina alone with her unlikely charges and a situation that had somehow escalated from prisoner to babysitter without anyone actually asking her opinion on the matter. Well, she said to the cubs, this is officially the weirdest week of my life. Pitch purred and drooled slightly on her shirt. 3 days later, Tina had become something she'd never expected, a consultant on alien childcare. It started small. Morvex had sent Greneth back with food for both her and the cubs, along with strict instructions to observe how she got them to eat. Tina had simply placed the food down, backed away, and waited. No forcing, no commands, no intimidation. Just patience. The cubs had approached cautiously, sniffed the offerings, and then devoured everything in about 30 seconds. "That's it?" Grenith had asked, his translator barely concealing his disbelief. "You simply provided food?" "And gave them space to feel safe while eating," Tina had explained. "Predators are vulnerable when they eat. They need to trust their environment. Your handlers were probably standing over them, watching, maybe even trying to control portions or timing." The cubs read that as a threat. Word spread fast after that. By day 2, she had Ralmeth handlers rotating through observation shifts, watching how she interacted with the cubs. She showed them how to read body language, the difference between a warning hiss and a playful growl. She demonstrated gentle touch versus forceful handling. She explained concepts that seemed utterly foreign to them: play, comfort, positive reinforcement. "They are warriors," one handler had protested. "We do not coddle warriors." "They're babies who will eventually become warriors," Tina had corrected. "Right now, they need to learn trust, boundaries, and how to regulate their own emotions. Push them into combat training before they have that foundation, and you get what you had before: unstable, aggressive, dangerous cubs that even their own handlers can't approach." The handler had clicked skeptically but kept watching. By day 3, something remarkable happened. Other cubs in the facility, the ones who'd been showing similar behavioral problems, started responding to the new techniques. Handlers who implemented even basic versions of what Tina demonstrated saw immediate improvements. Less aggression, better feeding responses, cubs who actually slept through rest cycles instead of pacing endlessly. Tina sat in her cell, which had somehow transformed from a prison into a training center, with Pitch's head in her lap and a datapad that Grenith had provided. She was supposed to be writing out her methods in a format the broodmasters could implement across all facilities. "This is insane," she muttered, scratching behind Pitch's sensory organs while typing with one hand. "I'm a soldier. I shoot things and break stuff. I'm not a child development specialist." Null chirped from her position by the food bowls, and Wraith, who was finally putting weight on that hind leg properly, bounded over to investigate what she'd found. The force field deactivated, and Morvex entered. The cubs looked up, no longer hissing, though they stayed close to Tina. Progress, she supposed. "General," Tina said, setting the datapad aside. "Come to check on your investment?" "I come to inform you that High Command has received my reports," Morvex said, his tone unreadable, "along with recorded footage of your methods." Tina's stomach dropped. "And?" "There is significant debate. Many consider your approach weakness, coddling future warriors, softening them." He paused. "Others point out that for the first time in 6 cycles, we have not lost a single cub to behavioral termination protocols." "Good," Tina said firmly, "because killing children for being traumatized is about as monstrous as it gets." "We are a warrior culture," Morvex said, but there was less conviction in his voice than before. "Strength is survival." "Strength takes a lot of forms," Tina replied. She gestured at Pitch. "This one? He's going to be massive when he grows up, probably the biggest of his generation. But right now, he's a baby who has nightmares." "Yeah, I figured that out last night when he woke up whimpering. You know what I did? Held him, talked to him, let him feel safe. And this morning, he was calmer, more confident. That's not weakness. That's building a foundation for actual strength." The general was quiet for a long moment, watching the cubs. Null had brought Wraith a piece of the enrichment material Tina had requested, essentially fancy alien chew toys. They were playing, gentle and social, the kind of behavior that was essential for pack predators. Officer Grenith has been recording everything, Morvex said finally. Not just your methods with the cubs, your words, your explanations. He has been compiling them into training materials. Tina blinked. Grenith has? He believes your approach has merit, as do I, though it pains me to admit that an enemy prisoner has taught us something about our own species. The general's antennae twitched. High Command has made a decision. Your methods will be implemented across all Broodmaster facilities. Handlers will be retrained. Protocols will be rewritten. That's... wow. Okay, that's good. Tina felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. These cubs deserve better. Indeed. Morvex moved closer, and the cubs didn't react with hostility. Another miracle. There is more. Peace negotiations between our species have been underway for some time. This incident has become, unexpectedly, a point of discussion. Tina's eyes narrowed. How so? I was called to testify before High Command, the general said. I was asked to explain how an enemy combatant demonstrated more understanding of our offspring than we did. It was, politically speaking, humiliating. Good, Tina said without sympathy. It was also, Morvex continued, the final piece of evidence needed to shift opinion toward peace. If we cannot even care for our own young properly, what does that say about our claims of superiority? The hawks lost significant influence. The doves gained it. Negotiations have accelerated. Tina stared at him. You're telling me that me accidentally babysitting 3 predator cubs helped end a war? The galaxy is strange, Morvex said, which was possibly the most agreeable thing he'd ever said. There will be a prisoner exchange in 5 days. You will be returned to your people. Something twisted in Tina's chest. She looked down at Pitch, who was dozing peacefully in her lap, at Null and Wraith, who were still playing with their toys. What about them? They will remain in our care, under new protocols, with handlers trained in your methods. The general paused. You have given them a future, human. They will not be terminated. They will become the warriors they were meant to be. But they will also be allowed to be young first. They'll need consistency, Tina said, her voice rough. Routine. Handlers who actually care about them, not just about what they can become. And someone needs to check on Wraith's leg regularly. It's not injured, but she favors it when she's stressed. That's a tell that she needs more comfort, not punishment. These things will be done. Morvex turned to leave, then stopped. You have my gratitude, Lieutenant Tina, though I suspect you do not particularly care for it. I care that these babies will be okay, Tina said. That's enough. The general left, and Tina sat in silence with the cubs. 5 days. Then she'd go home, back to her unit, back to her normal life. These 3 would grow up, become the elite warriors their genetics demanded, and probably never remember the human who'd kept them safe for 3 strange days on a military base. Except that wasn't quite how it played out. 5 days later, at the prisoner exchange on the neutral moon of Galleon 3, Tina said goodbye to 3 predator cubs who absolutely refused to let her leave without a fight. Pitch had to be physically restrained by 4 handlers. Null tried to follow her through the checkpoint. Wraith just sat and made the most heartbreaking crying sounds Tina had ever heard. I'll visit, she promised, though she had no idea if that was possible. When the war's over, when things are normal, I'll come back and check on you, I promise. Whether they understood or not, she couldn't tell. But they stopped fighting as she walked away. Months passed. The war ended officially with treaties and ceremonies and all the bureaucratic nonsense that Tina avoided whenever possible. She returned to regular duty, wrote reports about her capture that made her sound significantly more heroic than she'd felt, and tried not to think too much about 3 cubs on an alien base. Then, the communication came through. Official channels, military encryption, marked with Ralmeth Collective insignia. Her commander had looked at her like she'd grown a second head when he'd handed it over. The message was from Morvex. Brief, formal, but underneath the military language there was something almost warm. Lieutenant Tina, High Command has created a new designation within our cultural framework, Brood Guardian. This title is bestowed upon those who demonstrate exceptional care for our young, regardless of species. You are the first non-Ralmeth to receive this honor. The cubs you protected, Pitch, Null, and Wraith, have completed their primary development phase with distinction. They continue to thrive under revised protocols. They request your presence, should you wish to visit. Coordinates attached. General Morvex. Attached to the message was a video file. Tina opened it with shaking hands. 3 juvenile predators, significantly larger than she remembered, but still recognizably her cubs, sat in what looked like a training facility. Their handler, Greneth, if she wasn't mistaken, stood beside them, and all 3 were purring. The sound came through the speakers, that deep, resonant thrumming that Tina had fallen asleep to during the strangest week of her life. The cubs looked healthy, confident, calm. Everything they should be. Tina wiped her eyes and started drafting her leave request. Some promises, it turned out, were worth keeping.